Dear learners, welcome to the video lecture series 10 for BA first semester Political Science paper Introduction to the Political Theory. I am Dr. Deepak Kumar Kashyap, Assistant Professor at Pandit Sundarlal Sarma Open University. Today we will discuss two important perspectives in the study of political science: the modern approach and the behavioral approach. These approaches emerged in the 20th century and significantly transformed the way political phenomena are studied. The modern approaches developed as a response to the limitation of traditional political science, which mainly focused on institutions, constitutions, and legal framework. Scholars began to argue that political science should move beyond the study of formal structures and instead focus on the actual functioning of political science systems and the behavior of individuals within them. The modern approach therefore emphasized scientific methods, empirical research, and interdisciplinary perspective, drawing insights from sociology, psychology, economics, and anthropology. One of the most influential developments within the modern approach is the behavioral approach. This approach gained prominence particularly after the Second World War and focused on the observable political behavior of individuals and groups. Instead of only studying political institutions, behavioral scholars examine how people vote, how political attitudes are formed, how leaders make decisions, and how political participant, participation occurs in society. The behavioral approach stresses the use of quantitative methods, surveys, statistical analysis, and empirical data to make political science more scientific and objective. It aims to identify patterns and generalizations about political behavior. Thus, will the modern approach broadened the scope of political science. The behavior approach dep- deepened it by focusing on human political behavior and scientific analysis. Together, these approaches help transform political science into a more empirical and analytical discipline. In this lecture, we will examine the key features, contributions, and limitations of these approaches in greater detail.
In first slide, we talk about what are the approaches that will be affected the evolution of political science. Basically, political science has not always looked at the way it does today. The discipline has undergone profound transformation across centuries, and that's shaped by shifting intellectual priorities and the demands of an increasingly complex world. If we talk about the approaches, there are the three approaches. First is the dominated by the traditional approach. Second is limitation became apparent, and third rise of the modern approach. In earlier classes, we talk about the traditional approaches in various form. In these lectures, we can talk about the modern approaches and what are the modern approaches which help in relevance in present time. If we talk about what are the traditional approach, we can say in this in early political science barely focus heavily on institutions, constitutions, and legal structure that describing formal arrangements of government rather than analyzing how they actually operated. Second, limitation became apparent. Traditional methods were largely normative and descriptive, which offering little insight into real political behavior or the dynamics of everyday political life. And the third, the rise of the modern approach. The need of scientific, realistic, and systematic analysis that is created the intellectual space for modern approaches to emerge and eventually dominate the discipline. So basically, we talk about the modern approaches we can study in next slides. If we talk about the what is the meaning of modern approach, basically the modern approach studies the political process and behavior rather than merely examining formal institution. This concept is in this manner it is different from the traditional approach where merely focus on the formal institution and it shifts the analytical lens from what government are supposed to do to what they actually do and how citizens actually participate in politics. And it's hard, the modern approach insists the political science they must adopt the rigor of the natural and social sciences that gathering evidence and testing hypotheses and building cumulative knowledge. If you talk about the pillars of a modern approach, there are three pillars. First is the scientific and empirical, which relies on observation, evidence, and systematic research method. Second is interdisciplinary. It draws on sociology, psychology, economics, and statistics. And third pillar is or process oriented that examines how political system actually function in practice. If we talk about how the modern approach will emerge, it is divided in the four parts. First in early 20th century, second in interwar period, third in post-war, second and fourth 1950s to 1970s. So we can say that the modern approach did not arise in isolation, but it was the product of broader intellectual and historical currents that reshaped the social sciences throughout the 20th century. So in early 20th century, we can showing that growing dissatisfaction with purely descriptive and legalistic method in political science. So after that, the interwar period, the influence of scientific and research method from sociology, psychology, and economics begins to permeate political inquiry. Third, the post-World War second. If we saw the post-World War second, there are a lot of the countries have a democratic. So the political behavior of all the citizens are different in democratic society. So the behavioral revolution gains this momentum and the scholars seeks more rigorous, empirically grounded and political analysis to understand post-war democracies. And last, 1950s to 1970s. In this time of period, the modern approaches become dominant in American and eventually global political science department. So if we talk about the objectives of modern approach, there are three objectives. First is scientific rigor, second is the real political process, and third is the theory building. If we talk about the scientific rigor, it make political science more systematic and scientifically, which applying research method that allows findings to be tested, verified, and replicated. The second is the real political processes. In this, to study the actual political behavior and processes, and they occur rather than focusing solely on ideal type institutions or constitutional law. And third objective is the theory building. In this objective, it develops generalizations, models, and theories about political life that have explanatory and predictive power across diverse contexts. If we talk about the major approaches in political science, that is the most modern approach. First is the behavioral approach that studies observable political behavior of individuals and groups which using empirical and scientific method. Second is the system approach. In this approach, it views the political system as an integrated whole, the processes inputs and produces outputs. The third is structural functional approach. It examines the structure within a political system and the functions they perform to maintain stability. The fourth is decision-making approach. It focuses on how political decisions are made, the actors, processes, and constraints involved. And fifth is the game theory. In this approach, game theory applies mathematical model of strategic interaction to understand political competition and cooperations. If we talk about the meaning of behavioral approach, how behavioral approach is defined, we can say that the behavioral approach it directs attention to the observable political behavior of individuals and groups rather than study constitution or government structures in the abstract. It asks why do people actually do in politics, and it treats politics as a science of human behavior where measurable, analyzable, and capable of generating reliable validation. The key distinction from the traditional approaches, where traditional political science asked what should government do, the behavioral approach asks what do political actors actually do and why. This shift from normative prescription to empirical description and explanation marked a revolutionary turn in this approach. If we talk about the emergence of behavior approach, first is the American origin, which is developed in 1940s and 1950s. The second is the post World War II, and third is the methodological advances. If we talk about the American origins, the behavioralism developed primarily in US, where political scientists were inspired by the success of psychological and sociological research methods and eager to place political science on equally rigorous scientific footing. The second is post-World War II momentum. After the Second World War created urgent questions about democracy, authoritarianism, and public opinion, where behavioral method offered tools, especially survey and statistical analysis, to study these questions empirically. And third is the methodological advances. In this the survey research, sampling technique, and statistical computing made it possible to collect and analyze large data sets on political attitudes and behavior for the first time. So, if we talk about the which political scientist is promoted this concept of behavioralism, the first is the David Stern, who is also known as the father of behavioralism. It pioneered the system approach to political analysis and later championed post-behavioralism, calling for relevance in political research. The second is Gabriel Almond, which is barely famous on the giving the concept of structural functional approach and comparative politics framework. He emphasizing political culture and socialization. The third is the Robert Dahl, which is known as for his influential work on democracy and pluralism, and he studies how power is distributed in democratic society through empirical method. The fourth is the Charles Merriam, an early advocate for a science of politics. Merriam helped lay the intellectual groundwork for the behavioral revolution at the University of Chicago. So basically, we said that these four key thinkers, which is help to develop behavioralism in modern approaches. If we talk about the core principles of behavioral approach, the first is it uses the scientific method. The second, it based on empirical observation. The third, the quantification, the format, value neutrality, and fifth, the verification. If we talk about the scientific method, it basically the political inquiry must follow the same rigorous procedure as the natural science, forming hypothesis, collecting data, and testing conclusion. Basically, it is also used like a science. The second is empirical observation, where only observable and verifiable phenomena qualify as the legitimate subject matter and abstract norms alone are insufficient. Third is the quantification, where possible political phenomena should be measured and quantified to allow precise comparison and analysis. The fourth principle is value neutrality. The researcher must separate personal values from scientific inquiry, striving for objective, bias-free analysis. The fifth is the verification. The theories and findings must be subject to empirical verification and replication by independent researchers. If we talk about the focus area of behavioral studies, basically the behavioral study focus in the five areas. First is the voting behavior, second is political participation, third is political attitude, fourth public opinion, and fifth is leadership behavior. If we talk about the voting behavior, he focused on this that how and why citizens vote as they do, including the influence of party, identity, socioeconomic status, and media exposure on electoral choices. The second, political participation. The range of activities through which citizens engage with politics, from voting and campaigning to activism and community organizing. The third is political attitudes. These beliefs, values, and orientation that shape how individuals perceive political actors, institutions, and policy. The fourth is public opinion. In this area, the aggregate views of population on political issue measured through surveys and opinion polls. And the fifth is leadership behavior, where the decision making styles, motivations, and behavioral patterns of political leaders and leads. So basically, the behavioral studies focus in these areas where he studies and concluded his concepts. If we talk about what are the method used in the behavioral approach, the first is the survey and questionnaire. The second is statistical analysis. The third is case studies. Fourth is the field research, and fifth is the quantitative technique. And these five techniques is related to which method used in science to study any object. If we talk about the contributions of behavioral approach, basically, it gives the scientific foundations in the study of the political science. Second, it is based on data-based research. Third, it expanded the scope. And fourth, it creates new theory and models. If we talk about the scientific foundation, the behavioral approach, it transformed political science from a largely descriptive discipline into rigorous evidence-based science, which is capable for generating testable theories. The second is data-based approach, where the behavioral approach introduced systematic data collection and empirical research design as standard practice, enabling comparative analysis across time and place. The third, that is the expand scope. It the behavioral approach expanded is broadened the discipline's subject matter to include political attitudes, public opinion, and citizen behavior, not just formal institutions. And fourth, it creates new theory and models where it generated influence theoretical framework, including system theory, rational choice models, and voting behavior theories that continues to shape political science today. If we talk about the post-behavioral approach basically uh, the post-behavioral approach basically talks about the criticism of behavioralism. If we talk about the input importance in the contemporary political science of post behavioralism, first that is the understanding real political processes. In this approach, the modern approach equips scholars and practitioners to analyze how politics actually work beyond formal rules, enabling more accurate assessment of democratic health, governance quality, and political stability. The second, it improved policy analysis because it is the evidence-based method drawn from the modern approach directly, and it enhances public policy, research and evolution, which is helping government design more effective interventions and access outcomes rigorously. And third, it is interdisciplinary analytical discipline by embracing these tools and insights from economics, psychology, and sociology, modern political science has become a richer and a more versatile analytical discipline which is capable of addressing complex and real world political questions. So, the importance of contemporary political science we can see in these 3 points where which is relevance in present time. If we talk about the conclusion, basically the development of the political science shows a gradually shift from philosophical reflection to scientific analysis and social relevance. If we talk about in earlier lectures in traditional fairs, we can see that the political science mainly focus on institutions, laws, and normative ideas about the ideal state and good governance. Although this approach provides strong theoretical foundation and it paid late attention to how politics actually work in practice. If in we see in modern approaches which introduce greater scientific rigor, encouraging the use of empirical method and interdisciplinary perspective from fields such as sociology, economics, and psychology. This broaden the scope of political analysis. If we talk about the this current lectures, the behavioral revolution, which further transformed the discipline by emphasizing the study of real political behavior through data, survey, and quantitative research. However, it expressive focus on empirical method, sometimes it ignored moral values and social issues. To address this limitation, the post-behavioralism emerged and stressing both scientific inquiry and social responsibility. Thus, we can conclude that the contemporary political science balances theory, empirical research, and political relevance in understanding political life. Thank you. Thank you so much.